fuck it, this is my car, I'm going for it. I don't have to sell, I don't sell cars, so it's not like I'm trying to appeal to an audience. So, there's always going to be lovers and haters. That's the way the world is. And, some people like what I do, some people hate what I do. But so long as I make myself happy and please myself, that's really the end goal.
Welcome to Oil and Whiskey, an Ironclad original. I am Josh Henning.
I'm Phil Gerber.
I'm Jeremy Gerber.
Today's guest is Magnus Walker. He's a fashion designer, automobile enthusiast, and owner of one of the largest Porsche collections in the world. Growing up in Sheffield, England, Magnus set his eyes on a white 1977 Porsche 911 Turbo when he was 10 years old. He applied for a job with Porsche that very same year, but was told to apply when he got a little older. He moved into the United States in 1986 and purchased his first Porsche a few years later for $12,000. Magnus threw another 30,000 modifications to the car, and his path as a collector had begun. He burst on the automotive scene in 2012 after the release of the short film that I'm sure everybody is aware of, Urban Outlaw. Magnus stores and customizes his Porsches in a two-story, 26,000 square foot warehouse that is the envy to most everyone in Los Angeles. You can keep up with Magnus on Instagram at Magnus Walker and on his YouTube channel at Magnus Walker Urban Outlaw. Magnus Walker, welcome to Oil and Whiskey.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, man. I'm glad you could take the time. I'm sure that you've probably got tired of telling the story, but I would assume that some people that listen to us know, but there's probably a lot more that don't. We're in kind of two different worlds, in the automotive scene, but a little different world than you live in.
Yeah, the hot rod community is a little divided.
Yeah. So you got some guys that may be hearing this for the first time, and give them just you don't have to give the full Urban Outlaw experience, but give us a little bit of the breakdown of how all this got started.
Well, man with a beard, grew up listening to heavy metal in Sheffield, England, relocated to LA when I was 19 years old, actually worked on a summer camp in Detroit with underprivileged inner city kids. Made my way to LA, which was like the heyday of Guns N' Roses, Motley Crue. So it was rock and roll heaven for me. Long story short, I had a dream. I never gave up on the dream. And 35 years later, here I am. LA's the type of place where you can invent yourself and do whatever you want to do. The opportunity and the infrastructure is here. If you want to be a movie star, rock star, hairdresser, car collector, builder, beach bum, skater, whatever it is, LA's sort of the environment where creativity thrives and inspiration is everywhere. So I had a poster on a wall like the one behind me, wrote a letter to Porsche, and essentially never gave up on the dream. Bought one car at the Pomona swap meet 30 years ago for $7,500, and basically just over the past 30 years bought what I liked, customized it the way I liked, didn't care about other people's opinions. And, one thing led to another, and here I am today on the podcast with you guys. That's sort of long story short.
Yeah, maybe not the peak of your career, but we appreciate you taking the time out, man. Absolutely.
Hey, it could be the peak of my career. You never know.
What brought you to the States in the first place?
Well, I worked as a camp counselor on a summer camp. So for me, that was the easiest way, having no money, to actually get to America. It was, I worked a summer on Lake Michigan, north of Detroit, with inner city underprivileged kids from Detroit in the summer of '86. So that's what got me to America. I grew up working class, meaning, we didn't travel, but I grew up listening to a lot of American music, mostly heavy metal, and watching a lot of American TV shows. So I was inspired by everything from Evel Knievel to Chips, Captain America, Dukes of Hazzard, Rockford Files, Kojak, and all of these American-based shows really centered around the car for the most part. So I was inspired by Americana, car culture, sex, drugs, rock and roll, and LA's sort of the greatest place to cover all those bases, really. So that's what got me to America. I came basically not knowing anyone, worked that summer in Detroit in '86, and then took a Trailways bus from Detroit to LA, arrived at Union Station, which ironically is less than 2 miles from where I'm sat right now, at like 4 a.m. in the morning. And it was culture shock because everything that I just described, all this American TV shows that I've been watching, that wasn't like Union Station at 4 a.m. in the morning. I'm like, we're all the pretty people. We're all the movie stars. You know,
you're on a different
Union
channel.
Station at 4 a.m. is a little bit different to watching the Rockford Files in Malibu.
Was that pretty standard for a kid your age in England to be enamored with those same things? Were you an outlier amongst your other surroundings?
Well, growing up, American TV, we watched a lot of American TV shows, so that was somewhat normal. I grew up listening to a lot of heavy metal music. It was, new wave of British heavy metal, so it was everything from Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Saxon, UFO, stuff like that. And then sort of early 80s American influence came in that heavy metal music, Van Halen, Motley Crue. So it wasn't necessarily common because that wasn't the popular music at the time where I was growing up. But I sort of was drawn to the rebellious attitude of heavy metal music, and that I think was defining for the rest of my life. I don't like people telling me what to do, and I like doing things my own way, and I feel like I'm an individual, and that genre of music just sort of spoke to me. So, in a way, I'd always sort of been rebellious from an early age.
So you get in Union Station at 4 a.m. and I assume you've got just a fair amount, a little bit of money in your pocket. What's your plan? What do you got to start working? You got to start making some money.
I'm 19 years old. When you're 19 years old, you don't need a lot of money in your pocket, and you certainly don't need a plan. So, when you're a teenager, you're invincible. I'm the opposite to where do you see yourself in 5 years? I still don't know where I see myself in 5 years. So go back 36 years when I'm 19 years old at Union Station at 4 a.m. in the morning. I didn't have a plan. It didn't matter. The only plan that evolved was, hey, this is awesome out here. And to me, failure was going back to England. So the plan as a 19-year-old was just stay in LA as long as I can. That was the plan.
What was the very first paying job in LA?
Oh, it took a long time. You got to remember, this is 1986. I literally came with a couple of $100 in my pocket. So I didn't have much money, but back then in the 80s, you didn't need a lot of money. Being English in LA was a little bit of a novelty, and that sort of opened a lot of doors to couch surfing and staying on people's couches. And, you quickly learned you could get to the nightclubs at 9 a.m. and get in for free. You make friends with the bartender, you drink for free. You eat 25-cent frozen burritos and ramen and stuff like that. So a couple of $100 actually would go a long way when you don't have a lot of bills. So I bummed around probably in that genre of couch surfing and going to clubs quite a lot for probably a year until that novelty started to wear off a little bit, and it became a little bit tedious of not actually having something to occupy my time. That's only good for a certain period of time. So to answer your question, the first paying job was probably selling secondhand clothing on the boardwalk in Venice. That was probably the first paying job. And that might have been something like literally $10, $20 a day working on the boardwalk in Venice. So it wasn't like the money was great, but it didn't matter. I didn't need a lot of money. I was doing something that I loved, and it was occupying my time, and it was a stepping stone to the next thing. But it also represented ultimate freedom of, when I was in England, I all my adult responsibilities being done in LA, meaning in England when I was 19, I was still living with my mom and dad, didn't have a proper job, didn't own a car, barely had a bank account. So coming to LA was like sink or swim. You're either going to figure life out and adapt, or you go home a failure. And failure for me, going home wasn't an option. So I just made a little go a long way. But I learned that I could adapt to an unfamiliar environment, i.e. the summer camp in Detroit or sort of couch surfing in LA. And that's where survival tactics kick in. You learn to become what I call an adaptive swimmer, where you either sink or swim. So for me, that represented a first taste of success, meaning I don't have to cut my hair and get a real job, which is what people told me. And I can probably figure this thing out a little bit and actually make it work. So just a little bit of success gave me the confidence to keep pushing forward. And it was pretty much as simple as that. I didn't need a master plan. I think people are either book smart with an education that went to college and got a degree, or people like me that left school at 15 with very little education, but had passion, drive, motivation, more street smart, more of an entrepreneurial spirit where you're just going to figure it out and make it work because you're motivated and dedicated. So I didn't realize that at the time, but looking back, I realized those early formative years, I had a lot of drive and a lot of motivation just to stay in LA. Because to me, failure was going back to mom and dad, and that wasn't going to happen.
It's crazy, like you said, when the drive is so strong and the the fear of failure is so strong, it just takes a little bit of hope. Just like the slightest little grain of that part was successful, then it drives you to the next thing of, like you said, I mean, going.
Well, failing sucks.
Yeah, it's baby steps. You don't leap. You don't leap to the top or leap off the cliff. It's little baby steps, incremental steps that get you there. Where it's not quite as daunting as trying to climb Mount Everest. In a few steps. There's a lot of steps to ascend to get to where you want to go.
Oh yeah, I mean, like you said, failing sucks so bad, and you don't want to fail. That even a really shitty.
Sheffield's an industrial city. 35 years ago, it was sort of on hard times. The weather sucks. People knock you down. I'm in LA. The sun shines mostly all the time. People speak English and the welcoming of foreigners, and it was just a great environment. It still is. I've been in LA. I spent 19 years of my life in Sheffield, England. I've spent 36 years of my life in LA. So I've almost been in LA twice as long as I was in England. I became a US citizen a few years ago. I have dual citizenship. England gave me the drive and the British Bulldog spirit to never give up. And the sort of entrepreneurial skill set was developed really surviving on the streets of LA or couch surfing, and that was the opportunity that I'm grateful for, just having sort of the environment to flourish without someone putting you down and saying, oh, that'll never happen. England wasn't quite as free and supportive as LA was 35 years ago.
Judging by Magnus's beard, I don't think this is on his radar, but a little known fact about Sheffield is that's where some of the best straight razors came from. If you're in vintage straight razors or steel, Sheffield, England.
Sheffield is famous for steel. We invented stainless steel. Benjamin Huntsman invented that process. Sheffield is famous for cutlery. Razors is one of them. Knives and forks another. When England was booming as the car capital of Europe, potentially the world in steel and boats and industry, Sheffield supplied a lot of the steel to the industry, which when I arrived in Detroit in 86, the similarities were pretty similar. Detroit was, the motor city, right? But had fallen on hard times, a little bit like Sheffield, both former industrial cities that had great musical backgrounds and really genuine, pure, passionate people. So those two were pretty similar. But yeah, I actually haven't used a razor in quite some time, but you are right about Sheffield Steel and Sheffield blades. You got to keep them sharp.
That's the kind of thing I would think you would know, Josh. You always have those.
I just give you a little tidbit. I figured you'd like
Never
that.
cease to amaze. Yeah, really.
If so, when you're selling secondhand clothing, is that when you start getting into modifying the clothing and doing some of the fashion design? Then is that?
Yeah. That was purely organic. As a kid, my mom had a little tabletop sewing machine, and I learned to sew out of necessity by making my Levi's as tight as I could possibly get them and sewing patches onto the back of my jean jacket. So I had the ability to sew, but it never occurred to me that I would actually sort of go down a road of fashion designer. But, we all have our own individual style and taste. And yet again, LA was the melting pot where I'd go to yard sales and thrift stores and buy old Levi's for 50 cents, $1, $2, and then buy old floral Paisley Western shirts and cut them up. And it was sort of, I talk about timing being everything, and I've sort of been fortunate to be in the right place at the right time on multiple occasions, doing things ahead of what became trendy. And by that, I mean, I was coming from a rock and roll background, doing patchwork Levi's, sort of more on the Black Crowes, rock and roll, Grateful Dead vibe. And then this clash of culture happened in the late 80s, early 90s when the rave techno music scene took off. And they were fully into sort of trippy, hippie, Alice in Wonderland, Cat in the Hat, whimsical stuff. And these two styles sort of collided together. And Venice Beach was like the epicenter of culture in LA. It's been like that way for 100 years from the vaudeville days on the boardwalk. But a lot of Europeans would come down the boardwalk, and it was a big tourist attraction. And I was doing something that no one else was doing at a time when this sort of crossover rock and roll, techno, rave culture scene took off. and people just wanted to be flat. It was kind of like, but Venice in the late 80s, early 90s was sort of what I imagined Haight-Ashbury was like in the 60s. And I was sort of in the epicenter of that scene that exploded. And so, I went, from making one or two things to making hundreds of things to making thousands of things, from having one store on the boardwalk to wholesaling. And then it just sort of mushroomed pretty quickly, which also gave me a sort of a taste of success where I created something out of nothing, which people actually resonated with, related to, and ended up buying. So I'd kind of gone from couch surfing, nickel and diming 25-cent burritos to actually supporting myself financially by creating something with my hands that I designed and sold and people liked. So that, yet again, organic process. There wasn't a plan, come to LA, start a clothing company. It just evolved organically in this environment where if you sort of think that way creatively, the environment nurtures and things can blossom and expand somewhat seamlessly if you put the effort and hard work into it. I was working 12, 14 hours a day, but I was doing something that I loved that was challenging to me, that I was learning a skill set. So it didn't feel like work. It was just, wow, this is great and I'm making money and people dig it. It's like, it's as good as it could get, really.
So you're buying clothes at like thrift stores, you're modifying these clothes, creating clothes, and then selling them on the boardwalk? Is that where this all kind of starts?
Yeah. And then I started doing these whimsical Cat in the Hat, Mad Hatter, court jester type hats that I went to a trade show in New York and sold to Disneyland, and then sold to Six Flags Magic Mountain, and then sold to Universal Studios. So it kind of gone from, like I say, making a few of them to making thousands of them. And actually the business grew pretty quickly 30 years ago in the early 90s. And you got to remember the environment back then, no one's got a cell phone, Zoom calls don't exist, the internet doesn't exist. It's old school rock and roll of newspaper and magazines, and MTV barely exists. But yeah, it was a very unique time, which looking back just seemed pretty simple, but extremely creative.
Well, it's interesting you just said that you went to a trade show and you sold them to all these major corporations, because as you're talking about that, it's dawning on me like you're an enthusiast and of the lifestyle, creating something for the lifestyle. So it's authentic. There at that point in time there is no, and even today, there's no corporation that can come in and really build something for a lifestyle or the culture if they're not living it. It's always just a little, it's always a little generic. It's always,
start a fake trend.
People can pick up on that. So you're doing that, you're living that, but then you're also having to sell these things that are for the people, your group, everybody that's, you're living it. So you get that style, and then selling that stuff to, like you said, Disney and stuff like that. That's completely different.
The thread that sort of connected my life in America, in LA to be specific, is three threads that connected. It's fashion, architecture, and cars. And it's three things that I have no educational background in. I didn't go to school to learn fashion design. I always say ideas can't be taught. You either have them organically, they either turn you on and excite you where you get out of bed early and stay up late to do them, or you just don't have them. You can't go to a trade college and say, teach me an idea. You can go to a trade college and say, teach me the infrastructure of how you build this, how you run this. But yet the creative idea, it's either there or it isn't. Sometimes it flows real easy and sometimes it doesn't. It's like someone writing a song, but that's something that can't be taught. But I believe, for me and a lot of people I've met who came from a similar background, it's just things that you're passionate about, that you want to do yourself. You set your own goals, whatever they may be, and then you're driven to achieve those goals in small increments. So that was always my thing of just do cool shit with cool people, is what I say now. But back then it was like, I didn't follow a trend. I personally designed what I liked to wear. The cars that I built was a reflection of my own aesthetic style. And so I wasn't following the trend. I didn't realize at the time I was setting certain trends. I was just being myself, which was always a little bit different to the norm. So I wasn't trying to fit in and blend in with whatever scene was happening. I was just trying to do stuff that was creative and actually made me feel good. It was kind of a simple way of thinking of this feels good to do it. I'm going to keep doing it. Oh, I'm making some money. Oh, wow, I'll do it a little bit more. That's kind of how it was. I sometimes think if you don't have a great educational background, there are no rules and boundaries.
Yes.
You can cross-hatch things, that to some people, they go, no, that's never going to work. But yeah, if you're not afraid of failure, you just try stuff and make it work. And then people go, oh, wow, that was surprising. I didn't think that was going to work. You just got to have the inner self-confidence and believe to see the process through. Because, obviously, failure happens along the way, but it's more about, well, how motivated are you to keep going?
Well,
and I was pretty motivated because I didn't want to go back to England.
Yeah, we talk about it all the time on here. It's like the lack of education also just means that, you're too stupid to not know that you're not supposed to do it that way, or that you don't know those rules. You're never taught those rules to say.
A lot of great things have come from just not conforming, doing it the way that you just figure out how to do it.
Right.
It's not the way that they teach you in the book. But everything you've just said is really that kind of captures the hot rod industry, because all the standout cars, the stuff that's really solidified itself in time.
The game changers.
Those have been things that they don't conform. They're not with the trends. It's something so fresh, so different. I mean, they start trends, but they certainly didn't come from trends. It's a good way to be.
So
to me, the ultimate freedom is the availability to do whatever you want to do when you want to do it, regardless of what other people may think. I think a lot of people get sidestepped. They give up. They're afraid of failure. They ask their friends, what do you think about this idea? And the friends may go, oh, that'll never work. It's a stupid idea. And a lot of people just give up before they start. They don't even cross the start line. So, for me, I didn't really worry about other people's opinions, because that's how you get sidetracked and derailed sometimes.
Yeah.
I've always been a bit of a lone wolf, individual type of person. I don't travel in a pack and a posse. It's kind of that lone wolf aspect. I still sort of feel that way to this day.
So fast forward, you purchased the very first car. When you found that one, obviously, like you said, you had a vision from a very young age. Did you know every single thing you were going to do to it and what it was going to look like prior to the purchase, or did that come along as you're doing it?
No, it came along later. I mean, like in England, I never owned a car, didn't have a driver's license. So the first car I ever bought was a 1977 Toyota Corolla. Paid $200 for it in 1987. Drove it around without a driver's license in LA for about 6 months. Passed my California driver's test in that $200 Toyota. Kept that for about a year. So that represented ultimate freedom to begin with, i.e. not relying on other people or getting on a bicycle or waiting for a bus. And LA obviously is a transportation city. You can't just walk from Santa Monica to Hollywood. So the $200 Toyota represented freedom. Second car I ever bought was a Saab Turbo, believe it or not, probably in 88, 89. But the first real significant car I ever bought was my dream car, was the third car I ever bought, was that Porsche slant nose $7,500 turbo lookalike from the Pomona Swamp Meet. And within a month of buying that with a 2.7 motor in it, I realized, it needs more power. Sole show, no go. So I went to the local Porsche race shop in Venice called Otto's, and he put a 3-liter motor in it. And so the first Porsche I ever bought was already modified. It was a slant nose conversion of a regular 911. So it was a mild sort of cosmetic makeover, hot rod wannabe. So, that took me down the slippery slope of modification pretty early. At the time I was 25, and that $7,500 Porsche represented the dream come true of 15 years earlier. I was a 10-year-old that went to the Illinois Court Motor Show in 1977, wrote the letter to Porsche. You got to remember, growing up in Sheffield, it's a working class city where Porsches were not a common sight. So it was a dream, but I didn't think I would own one. So when I owned one at the age of 25, and I owned it on my own success of making my own money. It wasn't like a family member gave it to me or my dad bought it for me. That really represented, oh, wow, this is dream come true, personal achievement right there. So that was the first significant car that was already modified. So that took me down the slippery slope of owning quite a lot of cars over the past 30 years, not purely Porsche. I've owned muscle cars, I've owned European sports cars. Porsche's my drug of choice. It's my religion, but, I also like Mopars and things like that. So I think we all got a need for speed. It's just a matter of how you want to put the power to the ground, really.
Was the Porsche, was that something that was always in the back of your head that was a driving force to have enough success to be able to obtain one? Or was that just, I'm cranking, I'm making badass clothes, now I got some money. Oh shit, yeah, that Porsche when I was a kid was really cool. I'm gonna get one of those.
Yeah, it was the latter one.
Okay.
It's the greatest thing about Porsches up till about 10 years ago is they were affordable. $7,500 as a 25-year-old, it was obtainable. So it was relatable. It was a dream. It was obtainable. You couldn't go buy a Ferrari or a Lamborghini or a Maserati or an E-Type Jag or an Aston Martin for $7,500. We could buy a 911 for $7,500. So, America was Porsche's largest market. It still is. LA, California is the capital of that market. So in a way, there were a lot of Porsches in LA. They still are. And back then, 30 years ago, these things were affordable. They hadn't risen to the value of where they're at today. Because I always said the greatest thing about Porsche is, they were relatable, they were affordable, they were reliable. You'd see a lot of high mileage Porsches because people would drive them because they were reliable, unlike Ferraris that are not quite as reliable. And Porsche just covered all the senses. So, for me, it literally was like I made the dream come true. It was as simple as that. And that dream cost me $7,500. And I did it through working with my hands. So it came naturally, it came organically, and it wasn't necessarily overthought either. And it wasn't, and it still isn't. I don't view Porsches as something that's such a rare object that you can't use them. I don't worry about scratches and dings and things like that, even to this day. So, I sort of kept them relatable.
I think that's something that hit home. I was watching one of your videos on you driving all 10 cars to the Petersen Museum. And it's first time in the history of the Petersen that the cars for this display were all driven there. And it's refreshing to hear, and it's great because there is so many iconic cars that do sit around, either sit in a museum or sit in a private collection. People spend big money on custom cars, restorations. We build them. But it's nice to see people utilizing that car in its intended way and getting their return on their investment more so than just looking at it, because that's the passion. The passion is what the car does. It does give you a certain type of feeling when you look at it, but that certain type of feeling that you get when you're looking at it, most of that encompasses what it would feel like to be driving it.
Yeah, the feeling you get when you're driving, it's way better than the feeling you get when you're looking at it.
Right.
Which Porsche, like you said, they do a great job of creating a car that can be driven. Because jumping in, a 80-something Ferrari,
yeah, you're scared to death.
Yeah,
to make it back home.
I say all the time what brings like-minded car enthusiasts together, doesn't matter whether into muscle cars, drift cars, import tuners, whatever it may be. I've been fortunate enough to travel all over the world and meet lots of like-minded fellow culture car people, but they all share the same passion of it starts with a dream, a vision. You're a kid, your dad had it, your next door neighbor had it. So the seed is sown, then you chase the car, acquire the car, build the car, restore the car, race the car. But ultimately, it boils down to the drive is the be-all and end-all that covers the senses. And then it's the community around it, right? The people who relate to whatever it is you built from that same shared common bond interest. And the car to me is a great equalizer. I've met people from all walks of life that I would probably never have met if we didn't share the passion for the car. And the car to me is more than the vehicle that takes you on the journey from A to B. It's the whole community and the culture, whether it's East LA lowriders or Porsche people, right? The common bond, really, the genuine bond is there, I think. For me, I say the car world's like a big piece of cake, and some people like to put them on a golf course and have judges tell them what's right and wrong with them. Some like to modify, some like to build, but there's a lot of different slices to this cake that make up car culture. But for me, ultimately, these are objects that were built to be driven, which is why when I had my 10-year anniversary exhibition at the Petersen, it was a badge of honor to make sure all 10 cars were driven there together at the same time. which is something I'd never done. You know, I've had a couple of buddies take 2 or 3 cars out, but I'd never had 10 of my cars on the road together. And even though the museum's only 10 miles from where I'm sat, I would say 99% of the cars that go to the Petersen arrive on a trailer and a hauler and are pushed into display. Mine were all driven there. No one broke down. No one got a speeding ticket. No one got pulled over. And then I drove them into the exhibition hall, and they were there for 3.5 months. And the goal of that 10-year anniversary exhibition was trying to relocate the garage that I'm sat in into the Petersen Museum so other people could experience what I'd put together and, you know, share stories and just enjoy the community. That was the goal of the exhibition, to celebrate 10 years of Tamir Moscovici's film Urban Outlaw that came out October 15, 2012, and sort of put me on the global automotive world. Before that, I was known a little bit locally, but his film captured the essence of what we all share about modifying and building, outlawing, hot rodding, resto modding, whatever you want to call it, right? You know, creating your own vision with your own car. And that became the relatability to the film that went beyond Porsche people. A lot of people, whether it was wives and girlfriends, would send me emails of, wow, you know, I sat down with my significant other, boyfriend, husband, whatever, and, you know, I don't normally watch car films, but now I see what he's into. It became the relatability, which to me was like the greatest compliment that went beyond, oh, you built some cool Porsches. It was more the relatability that everyone shares that same passion of what I'm talking about. My passion just seems to focus on Porsche, but it's a common interest level.
Go ahead.
The Outlaw thing is interesting to me because when you like associate it with the Porsche crowd, like for us, we got our start in hot rods, you know, 30s, 40s hot rods. I mean, that came from basically an outlaw lifestyle, you know, not much different than like the choppers and things like that. But in the 90s, like when you started probably doing more Porsche stuff, I mean, the Porsche dude, that's a like khakis, Izod, and loafers kind of guy. You know?
Yeah.
A lot of like dentist. Every dentist I ever had a 911. There was one 911 always sitting in the parking lot, and it was a dentist's car. You know. Right. So how did that work out? Diving in and taking it into that kind of outlaw look and lifestyle.
I mean, I get asked these questions a fair amount, and I always backtrack it to. I go, well, you know, James Dean was outlawing Porsches back in the 50s with Little Bastard that won Dutch Pinstripe, right? And George Barris and Dean Jeffries and all these hot rodders of the 50s. You know, people have been, as you guys know, because you just talked about it, hot rodding cars post-war in the late 40s, early 50s. It's American Graffiti, it's George Lucas, it's, you know, Ed Hardy and Big Daddy Roth, hot rodding that stuff. But James Dean really was the first guy to really, I would say, hot rodded a Porsche. So the greatest thing about Porsches is, other than the khaki wearing Izod shirt, dentist, doctor, and lawyer stereotype, Porsches are easy to modify in the sense of, you know, swapping transmissions and motors in and out. A lot of people didn't necessarily do that unless you really had a need for speed. For me, I wasn't the purist that really cared about modifying my cars. And I also didn't look to emulate like a Golf livery or a Martini livery or something the factory had done. I was just doing my own thing. When Tamir's film came out in 2012, I talk about timing being everything. The following year was the 50th anniversary of the 911. So the whole world was talking about the 911, whether it was Motor Trend, Road and Track, Car and Driver. There was a lot of, the spotlight was on Porsche. And obviously, I was the opposite to that character that you described, you know, the guy that joins the Porsche Club and has a little badge that says Bob Smith, Porsche Club Region, whatever, and he's a doctor, right? I was the opposite of that. But I made a film that was pretty compelling that people related to. And this, for me, is a hobby. It's not a business. I'm not buying and selling and building customer cars. So my story was not like a one-trick pony. It wasn't purely 911. It was all the other models of Porsche, 914, 924, 928, and a lot of variety. So I became like the rock and roll face of Porsche during that period of time. And you got to remember, in a way, we just made a film. It was originally going to be a short 3 to 5 minute YouTube documentary. And Tamir, the Canadian guy, flew down from Toronto on frequent flyer miles. It was a passion project. We shot for 4 days and ended up with a 32-minute award-winning documentary that got a lot of interest. You got to remember, back in 2012, the content world wasn't what it is today. It wasn't quite as easy to go get your phone and shoot a video and put it on Instagram. You know, Instagram barely existed, and I wasn't even really on it at the time. So we were ahead of the trend yet again, creating a short documentary film that was done in a cinematic way that took you on a journey of my life, which we've been talking about. And the vehicle that I drove in that journey was the Porsche. But Urban Outlaw is not really a film necessarily about Porsche. It's a film about my journey of coming to America. So people related to that again. So I sort of became a little bit of the face of, you know, the name Urban Outlaw, we didn't even come up with it. It was an article in a British magazine called Total 911. I lived in an urban environment, and they said, well, what are these Porsches? You know, we can't call them hot rods. So, you know, there was a term outlaw that went back to the 356 days. So that was about as simple as that term was. I didn't even come up with the term Urban Outlaw, but we went, it's actually a pretty great title for a film. So we'll just call the film Urban Outlaw, and didn't give that much thought either. I don't overthink, you know, too many things. It's just in the moment, does it feel right? Yeah, it feels right. Okay, Urban Outlaw, that's it.
Well, it's,
you know, an outlaw is someone that lives outside of the law, if you look up what that means. And I think we can all relate to that. The outlaw Josie Wales, bikers, hot rodders, rebels. You know, it ties back into 15-year-old me going to see, you know, Saxon and, you know, Deep Purple. You know, the heavy metal music was sort of an outlaw genre of music 40 years ago. Black Sabbath, you know, it was slightly edgy, you know, or it was edgy, whichever way you want to look at it. So I kind of came from that background anyway. So adding my own character and personality to my own car, I always say, sure, car, you do whatever you want to it. You know, it wasn't like I was trying to piss off the purist. That just happened organically. You know, I didn't even have to try. You know, that was pretty easy to do that.
Do you think the YouTube video and then all social media and everything has helped make that a lot more accessible to the average person? I'm sorry, make it more acceptable and accessible to the rest of the Porsche crowd?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, there's a younger Porsche demographic. That stereotypical doctor, lawyer, dentist is not quite what it was. You know, there is an element of truth to that. I think now there's a younger demographic that are Porsche owners. I've received a lot of emails over the past decade of people that, you know, were not into Porsches for whatever reason, but saw what I'd done to them. And, you know, that made them a little more accessible. So I've got a lot of emails that basically say, hey, because of you, I bought my first Porsche, whether it was a 914 or 924 or 911, it doesn't really matter. It was just, in a way, it sort of made them, I'm not going to say cooler, but maybe it made them more relatable, maybe not quite as douchebaggy, you know, type of thing. So, you know, I've heard all of those things, but I didn't really, yet again, I don't think that far forward. I'm like, what do I want to do to this car? What's the theme? Does it excite me? Does it not excite me? And then the chips kind of fall where they fall, and people are either along for the ride or they're not. I'm either cool or I'm an asshole. It's, you know, everyone's got an opinion. I don't really dwell too much on it, for better or worse.
You're talking before with all the, you know, American Chopper and like all the Jesse James stuff. It's like you'd need like the right front man almost that's got the cool look, the passion, the authenticity to get it out there, to break down all the barriers and get it in front of the mainstream to, I don't know, grow that little aspect.
Well, I was going to go with that and relate it to exactly to the Jesse James and the fact, but that did for our industry what this did, I think, for automotive customization. So that was a skill set. That was like, holy shit, they're selling this lifestyle. Everybody wants to be as badass as Jesse James. I need to go learn how to shape metal to do this types of things. Where if you watch Urban Outlaw, I was about to talk about this too, and it's because we just talked about the soul of the car and the feeling is that drive. Well, up until then, there was no any type of cinematography or film besides a chase scene in a movie that could give you that experience. And I think Urban Outlaw was the first one to do that. So that's showing you this lifestyle, but it's also showing you that, and this is no offense, that you don't have to have a specific skill set to get into this. This is just,
No.
this is what you can do with these cars, and it makes it, like you said, more socially acceptable to kind of modify and do your own thing and have fun. It's the soul and the lifestyle that did. Like,
People
still to
relate
this
to
day,
the
nothing's
soul
done.
and passion. That was, we all watched, Monster Garage and, the build-off shows on Discovery Channel, whether you're into choppers or not. You all sort of watch people creating stuff with their hands as a learning skill set, right? And then that inspires you to go, well, if he can do it, I can probably do it, right? If nothing's too precious where you're going to worry about fucking it up, you can do whatever you want to do at that point. So, I think Jesse James, I watched all those shows, Monster Garage and everything else that came after that. And you relate to the people, the character, whether it's Orange County Choppers or whatever biker build-off show it was, or car-related show it is, or TV show, or whatever, right? You kind of relate to people's personalities. You're either with them or you're against them. They're either great or they're an asshole, but you might watch it anyway if they fall into either category, right? It's like, people that, you hear about Howard Stern, people that hated Howard Stern, they always said listen for longer than people that liked him because you just wanted to hear what he was going to say next. So I think there's an engagement of, you're just drawn to certain things, and that's the way of the world. And I think people are drawn to creativity, they're drawn to passion and energy, and the rest is just kind of what you do along the way to make yourself happy.
Well, everybody's craving authenticity too, because especially as we continue down this modern era, and it's so you're so used to all of the fake canned bullshit, from corporate America and from social media, from everywhere. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's seemingly authentic, somebody's page that's an influencer, it is not authentic. So anytime that you get to consume any type of media and that passion comes through and that guy's authentic, it's something special, and it doesn't come along that much.
No.
I mean, the challenge today is, you mentioned the word influencer, right? I always say, problem with influencers is they're easily influenced, right? So it's not always genuine. I use the word relatability a lot because, you do stuff that's true to you. I wrote that letter to Porsche 45 years ago. This is not a fashion trend that I'm growing out of. I'm in it. If you got a need for speed and you like your speed on 2 wheels or 4 wheels, this is not something that if you're a true enthusiast, you grow out of. Sort of things may develop and change along the way, but I've owned Porsches for 30 years. I've owned muscle cars, Super Bs, and, I recently bought a C3 Corvette 77. Doesn't do anything good except it makes us feel good. It looks good. It doesn't stop. It doesn't handle. It's not fast, but yeah, we love it. And it's a thing that I'd wanted. I always wanted a Corvette. I had a 65 Fastback GT 350 Mustang with a 351 Cleveland in it, a Detroit locker and a Richmond 5-speed, and it wasn't a Porsche, and I love it. My daily driver almost today is like I bought an old 1969 Rolls-Royce 2-door coupe, Mulliner Parkwood coupe, and it's just got all the style in the world. Doesn't really handle, not fast, but I've got to the point now where I have certain cars that go really fast, and then certain times in my day, it's not about getting from A to B as quickly as possible. It's like if I'm in the Corvette, right? You're not going anywhere fast in a C3, but yeah, there's something very cool about it. It's like stepping back to 1977. You kind of feel like you're in Boogie Nights, and that's all it needs to do, and it does that pretty well. So, I'm all about variety of drives and journeys. I talk about this all the time. It's what I call memorable moments and smiles per mile. It's what do you get back from this car that you acquired, built, or designed, or whatever it may be, and does it become a worthwhile journey down the road in a C3 Corvette? For me right now, yeah, it does. It's back to variety and experiencing different things.
So you've talked a lot about rock and roll and music, how music's influenced you and shaped you. Maybe you have stereos in these cars, maybe you don't, but what are you listening to when you're driving that 77 Vet compared to what you're listening to when you're driving a 80s 911?
Well, neither have radios. The 77 Vet, I'm listening to rattles and clanks and worn out bushings.
Squeaking
and,
fiberglass.
You know, a
cracking.
shitty, 3-speed transmission that doesn't shift. And I mean,
It sucks.
The one consolation with the Corvette is it's not loud. You know, we deliberately tried to find one that didn't have side pipes that was super loud. So that's what I'm listening to in the Vet. Lack of performance, lots of rattles and clanks. The 911's the opposite. You know, it's tight, it's raspy, it's revvy. You know, it's an engaging drive that covers all the senses. You're focusing way down the road because you're at a higher speed. You know, you're braking later, cornering faster, getting on the gas earlier. I generally don't have. I have one car that has a stereo in it. It's a newer car. It's a 2014 Turbo S. That's the car that when I bought it, it's a great story. I wasn't even looking for it. I was looking for something else, and this dropped into my lap. One owner car. It was 6 years old when I bought it. Had 160,000 miles on it. One owner. Wasn't like four bros that had thrashed the shit out of it. It was a high mileage Porsche that a mature owner lived in Newport Beach, commuted to Beverly Hills, maintained it, freeway miles, pennies on the dollar. So I'm like, all right, this makes sense. But when I got it, I didn't get out of it and look over my shoulder because it wasn't unique. It's like an appliance, you know, it's like the Swiss Army knife of 911s. And in LA, it's kind of a common car. I didn't customize it. And it did everything great, but it was kind of numb. But the turning point was I drove from LA to Moab, Utah, 800 miles in a day in that car. Stopped off along the way, spent 12 hours in it. I got out of it. My ears weren't ringing. I wasn't aching. I go, that's where this car excels. You can do 1,000 miles in a day in it. It's as fast as most things on your favorite road. Or if you're in bumper to bumper traffic, commuting 10 miles an hour, it's the only Porsche I own that's automatic. And at first I'm like, oh, it's not a real Porsche, it's automatic. But I realized it didn't matter. And that's the only Porsche I have that actually has a stereo that works in it. And it's got sat nav, and it's got heated seats, and it's got AC, and it's got all these things that hot rods shouldn't have. But, you know, I'm 55 years old, and if you're going to do 1,000 miles in a car in a day, maybe you want some of those creature comforts. It's not really the end of the world. That's the only car that has a stereo that I actually listen to and works.
That's why you need a warehouse full of them, because each one does something different. There's not one car that.
Yeah, they all do the same thing differently. You can have 5 versions of the same car, and trust me, I've had it. You know, it's like I have 5 turbos that are all pretty much the same, but yeah, you know, they're 45 years old, so they've all been tweaked and changed, and they do the same thing different. And I like that. You know, it's familiar but slightly different. It's the same but different. They don't shift the same way. One might be a bit faster than the other. One might turn in better, stop better. So, you know, it's I put myself in the position where I'm fortunate to have had the choice of variety in the cars that I'm able to drive. But also, I bought all these cars when they were, you know, affordable. I go back to affordability. You know, I've never owned a new car. I've never bought a new car. You know, I'm all about value for money in a way of, you know, I'd sooner have 5 20-grand cars than one $100,000 car.
Yeah, I missed the boat on that one. I was never, honestly, never a huge Porsche fan, like not as a kid, but you know, probably like in my 20s, I started really digging like the late 80s 911 turbos and wanted one so fucking bad. And when I got into my 30s, and you could have snagged one for probably 50 to 60 grand. And it was a little out of my price range, so I never got one. And today that car is what, 110, 120?
Yeah, I mean, I bought them when they were 20-grand cars. That was how I ended up with 5 of them. They were 20-grand cars.
That's
you
like
know,
the
timing's everything. You know, I used to own 2 Super Bs. You know, I bought a 383 4-speed for $3,500. It was F8 metallic green white interior, and then I had a triple black 440. You know, and that was $7,500. And this was in the early 90s, before Barrett Jackson made muscle cars go from 3,500 to 35 grand to 100 grand to whatever a plum crazy CUDA would be worth, right? You know, so back in the day when I was buying this stuff in the 90s, it really was pre-internet. It was pre-Barrett Jackson. It was pre-viral auctions where things doubled and tripled and doubled again. You know, like the 20-grand car that's now worth 100 or 200. But for me, I was never buying them as investments anyway, so it didn't really matter. To me, it's still that's a 20-grand car I'm sat next to, regardless of what the market value is today. I only paid 20 grand for it. So to me, it's still kind of a 20 grand car,
That's
unless I'm selling it.
That's kind of the
I'm
perfect
not gonna
recipe
sell it
for
for
the.
20 grand, but
That's kind of the perfect recipe for the hot rod world and where all that started was like you get a cheap car that's got some performance, you customize it, something that's easy to work on, that's reliable. And I was kind of always baffled by that the Porsche stuff didn't really take off until recently because it seems like, everybody would do the Volkswagens because you can buy them dirt cheap and
yeah.
an 8-year-old can rebuild
the right
a motor.
package.
Yeah.
Yeah, you look at the
I always say though, like the Porsche and the Mustang are pretty similar, even though the owners couldn't be more different. And, one's front engine and one's rear engine. But, the Mustang came out the same year as the 911, 1964. The owners fall into pretty similar categories. They either like them bone stock or they modify them or they go race them. So even though the two cars are polar opposites, right? They're both icons. Like when you think of Ford, you think of the Mustang, probably in the F-150. When you think of Porsche, you think of the 911. So those two groups of people, in a way, they share a similar passion for a different car.
Yeah, and you see them parked next to each other in garages often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They live together.
Yeah.
My name's Andy Stumpf. I'm a former Navy SEAL and the host of the Cleared Hot podcast. On the new Ironclad show, Change Agents, I talk to people risking it all to find solutions to seemingly unsolvable problems.
So there are hundreds of thousands of some of the poorest people in the world digging cobalt out of the ground.
Taking out a trafficker, force multiplying, because right then you take down the network, another guy's gonna pop back up for sure.
771 million humans are drinking dirty water. 2,000 kids will die today. We're not going fast enough to solve this problem.
Change Agents, an Ironclad original, coming soon to all major podcast platforms and Ironclad's YouTube channel at This Is Ironclad.
I'm interested in your creative process a little bit and just how some of that goes because everybody's different. We've had a lot of guests on here, and they all have creative backgrounds because most of the time they're in this industry. Everybody kind of falls into different categories. Sometimes you're about to start a project, and take for instance some of your 10 most iconic builds. So you've got some people have exactly what that finished product is going to look like before they start on that, right? And it's crystal clear in their mind's eye. Some people have a foggy vision in their mind's eye, and they know the direction, but it gets honed in as they start going, and it starts getting a little bit more crystal clear. Other guys have no idea whatsoever, and they just start with one thing that they know they're going to do. And that's what I'm at. Do you start with, I've got this white one, and I'm going to do a red bumper, and then see where everything goes? Or do you have in your mind at least the general, or is it exact down to, the stitching that you're going to do?
Mine's pretty exact, but my sort of design process is I have the idea. I talked about that earlier on. Ideas can't be taught, but putting that idea across, I don't do anything on a computer. There's no like Illustrator, Photoshop, CAD illustration rendering of what the car is going to look like. I see it in my mind, and my sort of area of inspiration is always the same. It's 60s and 70s Americana and European motorsports. To me, that represents, as a kid growing up, the heyday of motorsports. When I was in the 70s, I had the Martini Turbo poster on the wall. James Hunt was Formula One world champion. Barry Sheen was motorbike champion. So 60s and 70s is my era of influence from motorsports. And essentially what I do is I take elements of rock and roll, I take elements of Americana and hot rod, I take elements of vintage motorsports, and I throw them in this mental blender, and what comes out is this vision of the car. A lot of times they're all just bold color blocked, but it's not like I said earlier where I'm going to emulate the Martini car or, the Rothman's car or whatever livery it may be. I may take inspiration from that color combo and go, oh, Rothman's, yeah, it's got, these three colors, ivory, burgundy, and royal blue, right? But I'm going to tweak it where you don't know I bootleg the Rothman's livery or whatever livery it is. So I don't have like a printout sheet CAD file of this is what it's going to look like. I see it in my mind, and then it just sort of goes from there, especially with some of these art colors like the 993, which is like the United Colors of Benetton sort of camo battleship color block thing. And then the 914, which was sort of a 70s mod rock homage tour poster livery of graphics. You know, a lot of the continuing thread between my thing are tweaked race liveries, like Brumo's, for example. They have a red and blue stripe on a white car. So that was actually the inspiration for 277, which doesn't have a stripe, but it has a solid red hood and a blue bumper. But that came from a Brumo stripe, but I just color blocked it. So a lot of times I'll take elements like, you know, the louvered fenders and deck lids that I was doing on Porsches that no one was doing at the time. They were really pulled from 40s and 50s American graffiti, hot rods and rat rods, but no one had really done that on a Porsche. But everyone stamped louvers on hot rods, and you know, those louvers go back to pre-war days on Duesenbergs and Jags. So putting louvers on cars is nothing new. They just weren't done on Porsches, or they weren't done the way I did them on Porsches. So it was just me thinking outside of that generic formula of a Porsche has to be a certain way. I never thought that. It was the influences that were pulled. So I have the vision pretty clear to begin with. Obviously, sometimes it evolves, but it's not like it's ever a CAD illustrated file that is then just printed out and becomes like a vinyl wrap, for example, or something like that. You know, it's a lot more organic.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you talk about, you know, a lot of these race cars and these famous cars with this awesome livery, that's an area where we always struggle. When you look at a lot of those cars, because the form followed the function. So cool shit was a byproduct of like making something work. So those little like dummy lights with toggle switches and a little bit of like hockey tape around the shifter or a hose clamp here or a brushed aluminum simple piece that's broken and pop riveted on. Back then it was like, oh, this is what's going to get this done so we can get out on the racetrack. And it's so difficult because it's fucking cool. And it's so difficult, I find, when we're trying to do something in that genre, to try to replicate that, to try to get your mind, you work like so hard to make it look like you didn't work hard at all, you know? Yeah. And the Porsche
zip
stuff,
ties and duct tape can go a long way, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know if that stuff's necessarily cool, but there's other shit that, you know.
Yeah, like trying to make it, like you said,
I mean, that's what, to me, the SEMA show is all about, right? You know, I've been going to SEMA for 10 years, and, you know, it's always inspiring. You know, even though there's a boatload of resto mods and off-road lifted trucks and not a lot of Porsches. I mean, there's more Porsches now than there's ever been there, but 10 years ago, there wasn't a single Porsche there. But I'd go to SEMA and always come back inspired, whether it was something like you just described, or a color combo, or a finish, you know, a brush nickel, or matte this, or flat that, or, you know, whatever it may be, where you go, oh, wow, look at that. That's actually really awesome. I'm going to take some inspiration from that and put it into what I'm doing, even though it might have come from a hot rod. You know, my eyes are always open for inspiration, and inspiration's all around. The wider your vision can be, and the more you look outside of your box, i.e. the Porsche world, right, the more creative I became. Just by having the sort of, not the vision, but the awareness to think outside of, you know, the pure Porsche box. So, you know, I'm always going to car shows, whether it's, you know, it doesn't matter what it is. You know, cars and coffee to me are the greatest thing when you see a diverse mix of interesting cars. You know, I don't really care about seeing fancy Lamborghinis that are wrapped in foil, leopard skin, stuff like that. But, you know, go to a car show where you've got British cars, European cars, American cars, hot rods, Bob's Big Boy type stuff, you know what I mean? There's always a little widget or a drilled door handle or a louver or a strap, or like you say, something that's been wrapped and bandaged or, you know, stitched together is like, oh, or meshed together, or some sort of treatment that you go, yeah, I'll file that away for future reference.
Are you ever worried about bringing something out and not getting the response you want, or getting criticism on it? Or is it just, fuck it, this is my car, I'm going for it?
Fuck it, this is my car, I'm going for it. You know, I don't have to sell, I don't sell cars, so it's not like I'm trying to appeal to an audience. So, you know, there's always going to be lovers and haters. You know, that's the way the world is. And, you know, some people like what I do, some people hate what I do. But so long as I make myself happy and please myself, that's really the end goal. So I tend not to worry about that too much.
What was the first American car you bought?
was probably, back in the 90s, I had the 65 Mustang I talked about, which was a GT350R replica. That was an $8,500 car. I talked about the $3,500 Super B. These were all in the same era. I had the 440 Super B. I recently had a AMC Hornet that I bought on a whim because it had original paint and patina. It was a 75, like the James Bond car. Another all-show, no-go car. I've owned quite a few American cars. I always wanted a 67 RSZ 28 Camaro because that's my birth year. That's one I actually didn't get yet. Recently got the Corvette, so I take that off the box. I was actually looking for a chrome bumper C3. That was a car I really wanted.
Sure.
But those have kind of become a bit expensive, really. They were not like 10, 15, 20 grand cars anymore. So that was why we ended up with a non-chrome bumper C3. So
I think you're safe with the AMCs. I don't think they're going up.
Yeah, I don't think the Hornet's going to.
They've peaked. They definitely peaked.
No, the great thing about the AMC Hornet, I bought it from an English guy who was relocated to New England who really loved the car. And I wasn't even looking for it. He called me because I'd bought it at 92080 on. He goes, hey, you know anyone that might want to buy my AMC? I go, send me a picture. I go, wow, it looks fucking cool. It looks just like the car from the James Bond movie. I go, I'll come and look at it. And an hour later, I'd bought it for $7,500. And I drove it a few times and realized, it's really not that great. But I kept it. And the guy kept in contact with me. He said, hey, if you ever want to sell that car, I'll buy it back, even though he'd moved to. I go, all right, no, sure, I'll let you know. And then 3 years later, I sold it back to him for the same $7,500 I'd paid for it. So it was like full circle, scratched a little itch and felt like, we'd done a good deed and that was it, moved on. So that was another sort of memorable moment, really.
Then he's going to sell it for $15,000 as Magnus Walker's former AMC Hornet.
Oh yeah, that shit's on Bring a Trailer right now.
Up the pedigree. I just saw your recent video that you did with Bo Bachman on his slant nose, where you drove that and stuff. That thing looked pretty damn cool. Was that as awesome as it looked like to drive?
Well, underneath that, what I term as a three-way between a Ferrari Testarossa, a 944, and a turbo. Underneath that wild, wacky 80s bodywork, that's a stock 80s 3.3 turbo. So if you've ever driven one of those, the performance by today's standard, that car's 40 years old. It's not fast, doesn't stop great. The gears are super tall. It's got a small power band. There's tons of turbo lag. So to answer your question, it doesn't drive as good as it looks. But it's a pretty cool car, and I enjoyed driving it. I love the slant nose. You either love them or you hate them. The first 911 I ever bought 30 years ago, like I said, was a slant nose conversion. So they fall into the Miami Vice format of you either love them or you hate them. Purists might not like them, but ironically, those cars have become a lot more desirable and a lot more collectible.
Was that? I think it's cool because it just screams 80s. Like you said, Miami Vice.
Cocaine.
It screams cocaine, yeah. But was that cool when it was done back then? I mean, because you're copying a lot of iconic other vehicles with that body kit, and that doesn't seem like what would be generally considered like
well, the Rinspeed 969, they only made 12 of them. So that might be an indicator as to, was it successful or not? There were a lot of slant nose conversions done in the 80s, and that was a real popular trend, but they didn't look like the Rinspeed 969. The Swiss are kind of quirky. The Rinspeed guys, a Swiss company. So that was probably an acquired taste back then as well. I mean, Gumballa of the 80s, probably famous for the Vanilla Ice, white slant nose with all the swoops and big strakes and big wings. It was just 80s excess, right? That's what the 80s were all about. Shoulder pads and big turbo flares and big wings and, a lot of show and not necessarily go.
Yeah, the Testarossa kit was generally seen on like Mazda or S10 pickup trucks, not on a Porsche.
Well, it's funny when you bring that up because you look at like by today's standards, right? You take, let's say it's a Shelby Edition F-150 or a Regency Chevy 1500.
Yeah.
Well, we look at them today like that sucks.
Yep.
It's horrible, right? Now,
what is it going to be like in
30 years from now, just simply because it was old and it'll probably be rare at that time? Is somebody going to be recreating that, not knowing that it sucked?
The Shelby Raptor, the Shelby Raptor has got like 16 hood scoops on top of hood scoops. That's just absolutely an abomination.
too much is never enough, right?
Right. In 50 years, is that going to be something because it's got the Shelby name attached to it, or people are not going to know that everybody in this era thought it was dumb?
Well, you know, and that's something I always try to ask. Like, I always tried to ask my dad that and could never really get like the real answer. Like the way that I look at a brand new Dodge Challenger today, like to me, it sucks. There's nothing cool about it. It's big, it's modern, it's awkward. You know, when we hold these muscle cars on like this high pedestal of being so badass, they're hot rods. Back in their heyday, was that the way that they were looked at? Like, was he looking at that car the same way as I am and saying that, oh, well, like, you know, a 32 Ford, fucking badass.
Did
like
a B-body drive by at the, you know, when you're sitting at the light and you're like, oh shit, or is it just another?
Really, he's a douche.
Yeah.
Really a douchebag.
It's interesting.
Neon green.
Always
I
wondered.
think the late 60s, early 70s, that was, you know, the pinnacle of the muscle car era before the, you know, whole gas shortage, emissions, you know, mid 70s, no power scenario. You know, when I had my 69 Super B, I was like, wow, this thing's really, really fast and still cool 50 years later. It's, you know, that I think is a timeless classic for sure, but only time will tell on all the cars you just described, the Shelby F-150s and whatever else.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to do real well in the future, but we'll see.
Hey, we're in like the
Well,
second
it's going to be
coming.
interesting to see what the future is, right? You know, I always say as long as we can still get oil and gasoline, we'll still be driving what may be antiquated, you know, prehistoric fossil fuel internal combustion engines. You know, I don't think they're going to disappear off the face of the earth in the next 5 years, like everyone seems to think with electrification of everything, right? I mean, I don't see that actually happening that quick at all.
So you're not lining up to do an EV conversion on the next Urban Outlaw edition or anything like that?
Never say never. I've driven them. You know, it all comes down to range and performance, right? You know, it's range is a big thing. Like I drove those 800 miles to Moab in one day. How do you do that when there's no charging station along the road that you want to go from LA to Moab? And even if you get to one, is it working? Do you have to download an app? Do you have service? Is it working? I mean, the infrastructure is just not there.
Yeah, it's also difficult to get that. Like you said, you've got one radio. One car has a radio because all of the other visceral experiences and the things that are going on is what is lighting your candle or, you know, is pleasing you. Those smiles, you know, per miles. It's going to be difficult to get that in a completely silent automobile.
I think there's places for it. You know, I mean, if you're commuting from downtown LA to Santa Monica, it's 18 miles, you know, that might be perfect for an electric car. That, you know, in rush hour traffic, that could take an hour and a half.
But couldn't you just take the bus? You could just take
that?
You could just take the bus too, though.
Yeah, you could just take the bus for sure. I mean, electric cars to me, like, I no longer calculate sound with speed. And by that, I mean, my pet peeve is generally Mercedes, BMW, Brabus owners with loud barking exhausts that are farting around doing 20 miles an hour. They're not going fast, right? They're just making noise. Now, I've been in electric cars that are really, really quick and you don't hear them. And people go, you got to hear the sound, the visceral sound, and I get it. But there's something to be said about a car that's fast and cops don't hear you coming half a mile down the road.
That's
you know, there's other noises that come into play. But, you know, I'm not anti-electric car, but electric cars don't give you the freedom to go wherever you want to go and tick all the senses. You know, they're like an appliance, right? We all need appliances, you know, fridges and phones and stuff like that. But, you know, it's not something I get excited. I've never owned one. I don't get excited about owning one. You know, 90% of them look crap. I'm like, how can you design a brand new car from scratch and make it not look good, right? I don't get that either.
Just
you know,
because
they're just not inspiring from a creative point of view, from a visual point of view.
Just because they don't have to have any type of air cooling on the front because there is no radiator doesn't mean you can't do something cool up there. You don't have to just forget it. Just smooth it out. We don't have to do anything there.
All the designs focus on the turbine-looking wheels to make it clearly an EV.
Let's smooth the front out so everybody that's in front of you knows that you care about the environment, and let's put some turbine wheels on it to show that it's like you could make one cool looking.
And generally, those Tesla owners, you know, they're not great drivers either.
That the e-tron, I will say, is a pretty damn good looking.
Fucker's bad.
The e-tron is the Audis look. That thing.
Wheels still suck.
I mean, the Porsche Taycan, which is essentially the same platform as
gorgeous
the e-tron, is
car.
perhaps the best looking electric car.
Yeah.
But you look at the Lucid and go, this was made from scratch. To me, it doesn't look good. You couldn't have made that look good.
Yeah, there's just something seriously off with that car.
It's show car. Like the production vehicle looks like the prototype like 4 years ago. If you were to see it, like, oh, maybe they'll refine some of these things on the production vehicle, but the production one,
It reminds me of the kid like in high school with the huge calves and giant gym shoes. There's just something about like it's just something like awkward as hell about it. You know?
Yeah,
but the Taken
doesn't look good. Fit and finish is not good. I mean, I don't get it.
The Taken's a gorgeous car. I really dig that thing. And it's got the hips and it looks as fast.
Yeah, proportionally
as
it
hell,
looks good. You know, it looks fast. Doesn't look like a compound wedgie, whatever. I mean, don't even get me started about the Cybertruck. I mean, this thing will never make it into production.
Yeah, Porsche didn't lean into the EV thing too much. I mean, they put the wheels are a little funky, but you can unbolt those and put whatever you want on it. But
no, they stayed true to making something that had lines and didn't have to go. Yeah, Cybertruck.
Porsche for the most part is pretty good at that, you know.
The I don't know what's the small little SUV that they did a few years ago?
Who's that?
Porsche.
Porsche. Yeah.
Oh, the Macan.
Yeah.
Oh, like
that wasn't a very good looking.
I don't mind it.
Not in the car. I mean,
it looks like a shoe. It looks like a shoe.
Selling car.
It was.
It still is. Like the 911 counts for maybe 15%. Their top 3 selling cars are the Macan you just described, the Cayenne that's a bigger SUV.
Is that just because of price point though?
Yeah, you're buying a Porsche at $40,000.
It just looks like a shoe.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's shared platform, you know, with the Audi and the VW, all part of the VW group cross-platform sharing.
I think the only thing that Porsche's ever done that I'm like, what the fuck were you thinking? Is that
964?
No, the Panamera with the
shooting brake.
Wagon.
Yeah,
I liked it.
But they do one.
Oh yeah, the Cross Turismo Sport Turismo wagon.
Like, that's not good looking. It's just to me anyway.
So what's next up for you? I mean, good grief, like you said, I know you don't think far ahead, and that's fine. You don't have to say what you're planning on doing, but what things are up. I mean, you could with the urban.
I'm always looking to do cool shit with cool people. I got this new OPP show, Other People's Porsches, which I'm having fun with. I've done stuff with Mobile One. I've done stuff with Haggerty. Ironically, I was just down at Amelia Island as a judge on the Concours, which I thought would never happen. Just shot a couple of films in Miami. Yet again, just trying to do stuff that inspires me. We'll see what comes up. There's always some sort of collaboration that may or may not happen. I did a cool one with Nike on the 277 Dunk based around my 277 car. That was out of left field. So time will tell. I'm not actively out pitching stuff. It's the opposite. People come to me and want to collaborate, and I either go, yeah, that sounds cool, or no, it doesn't. So time will tell. But OPP, my new show on YouTube, that's something I'm excited about. Other People's Porsches.
It looked really good. I've watched a couple episodes when we were getting ready for this, and it's again, every single thing that I've seen you involved with, the cinematography and the feel and the vibe has just always been top notch. Literally, some of the best.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I mean, the OPP thing, people are relating to it, and it's a real easy show to shoot. I shoot it with one guy. We shoot in about 4 hours, and then he takes about a couple of days to edit. So, it's fun. It's easy. People like it. It's creative. It's inspiring. So I'm going to keep continuing doing that type of format that's not a big production. I'm a big believer in less is more. Don't make it overcomplicated. Keep it simple. That's kind of my thing.
How much were the rights to OPP for that as an intro song?
Are those guys still alive?
Well,
Two Live Crew,
we don't have the song in there. If I could get the rights and just have like 15 seconds of, you down with OPP, it would be fucking epic. It'd be great. I should probably look into that.
Yeah, that like initial fucking little bass line or whatever.
As soon as I saw OPP, I was like, and I clicked on it because I was expecting like, surely this is going to be in there.
I remember getting
no,
that
it's
on
not.
cassette.
But I thought about it, and it's interesting that you brought it up because it would be great just to have that little catchy hook, the bass line in there.
Yeah,
would be great.
Man, I would like
Vanilla Ice Porsche.
Oh yeah, dude. If we ever had to bring the Mustang up again, if we ever have that project, I would love to collab with you on a Mustang build. I think your style applied to that.
What era Mustang are you talking about?
60s? 65. Yeah, like
Yeah,
65, 66. They get a little too swoopy, in 67, 68. I like them when they're blocky, it's
raw race car.
That was what I had, 65.
No bumper.
It's a funny story. That Mustang I bought, in the 90s, like I say, I had a 351 Cleveland, Richmond 5-speed, Detroit locker. And here's the funny part to the story, because it ties into Shelby. When I actually sold it, I took it to the Pomona Swap Meet, and I'm sure you guys have gone to the Pomona Swap Meet out in LA. It's one of the greatest places for any car enthusiast to go, whether you're buying signs, parts, car culture, VW guys. I mean, it's just epic. But the funny part of me attempting to sell this Mustang 20 years ago at the Pomona Swap Meet, I remember it just like it was yesterday. A couple of punk teenagers come up, and they don't realize I hear what they say, but they delivered the world's greatest line. The line went just like this. Dude, it's not even a real one. Shelby didn't even sign it. Because most Mustangs have got the Shelby signature on the glove
one
box.
right there on the glove box.
He signed more than he built.
It ain't even real. Shelby didn't sign it. And I still remember it to this day. I'm like, that's so cool. But yeah, I'd like to do a Mustang. Yeah, it's funny. Recently I've been thinking, I kind of like a Mustang again. That era, 65, 66.
Yeah, and I'm not a big Mustang guy. Just they can be done right. They're cool.
We need to do something. Yeah, put one on a chassis and then let you put your flare on it and stuff like that. I think that'd be really cool.
Well, you know where I'm at.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right on.
We come to some standard questions that we ask every single guest. Favorite car, movie, and why?
Oh, that's a good one. You got me. You got me. I mean, the first thing that jumps to mind is Bullet. We're talking about Mustang. It's got the Bullet in it. We know it's a 68 Bullet. I'm going to say Bullet, only because I have a tie into that. I think that really defined the car chase genre. It's hard not to be a Steve McQueen fan. And believe it or not, I actually had the Bullet Mustang car in my garage in 2018 for 2 days. Yeah. Remember, it resurfaced, and then it went on the tour, and then it went up for auction. And I met the owner of it, the original Sons owner at the Detroit Auto Show. He's actually a Porsche owner, and he was doing the tour before it went to auction. And believe it or not, he needed a place to store that original Bullet Mustang for 2 days in LA. And it was right in this very garage. So I haven't watched the film. Being a McQueen fan, I'm friends with Chad McQueen, Steve's son. I had an Outlaw gallery in with the Mustang. So I'm going to say Bullet for those reasons.
Awesome. Love it.
Next question is a little bit of improv because he referenced two of my favorite shows, and you don't hear them mentioned near enough. So in between, these guys don't get it. This is a little bit before their time. Better show, Chips or Fall Guy?
Oh, Chips. I never really watched Fall Guys, but I watched Chips.
Yeah,
But Starsky and Hutch was really my champ.
Chips always opened with the best car chase and then wreck that was like very poorly done, but the wreck would go on for like 35 minutes.
I feel like I'd come home from school, like that would be on and instantly change the channel.
Yeah, Chips was
right
good
to
show.
Dukes of Hazzard, right?
No, Dukes of Hazzard was after.
Oh, wait.
Always after.
In our era, Dukes of Hazzard just played like on it just
it was not
kept going.
Really?
Kept going.
We only got one episode. We had to wait till another week to get another episode.
I mean, Bo and Lou, just a couple of good old boys with the Waylon Jennings song. Come on. Let's not forget Daisy.
Yeah,
how could
hard
you?
too.
Yeah. What advice would you give to someone that's trying to break into the car automotive design scene?
Pretty simple. Do your own thing. Don't worry about what other people think. Design for yourself what you'd personally like to own, build, and drive. That's what, stay motivated and never give up. The kind of the simple, obvious things. Yeah, but, design for yourself, build for yourself. Don't worry about what others think about it. That's
easy
always
to say
my
if you have good taste, though, because if you have horrible taste, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, you find that
good
quick.
point, Mike. Good point. I mean, not everyone it comes real easy to some people and not easy to others. So, yeah, you got a real valid point there. But that's always my advice.
You'd be surprised. I mean, there's plenty of shitty music And there's a lot of people listening to it, you know? And the same goes with cars. Like, there's people that build stuff that sucks.
There's an ass for every seat.
And people eat it up.
Yeah, good point.
Taking the talent side out of it and just making that a given. If somebody had decent talent, decent taste, could they do the same thing you did 35 years ago, come to LA with a few $100 in their pocket and do what you did?
Sure. I mean, over the weekend I go to flea markets all the time. I've been going on for 35 years. It's weird. I was talking to someone today. It's like the full circle. Like what I did 35 years ago is kind of the look today. This mishmash jam, patchworked up, semi-punk rock. The only difference is he might be wearing it with a baseball jersey and a pair of Nikes as opposed to a jean jacket. But yeah, sure. Yeah, still could be done.
Best piece of advice that you've ever received?
It's a great question because growing up, I didn't necessarily get a lot of support from my dad, from my father, right? You either do or you don't. And I tell this story quite a bit. As a kid, I was a middle distance cross country runner. And I ran for this club called the Hallandshire Harriers. This is late 70s. And a couple of years before me, there was a middle distance athlete called Sebastian Coe, who went on to be an Olympic champion and world record holder, 1980, 1984, world record holder, Olympic champion. And in 1978, I was running. I finished second or third in this race, and I still have this certificate, which I actually put in a book that I came out a few years ago. What all Sebastian Coe said, first of all, he was a hero of mine. And all he wrote was he signed this certificate and put, "Well done." 2 words, "well done." I'm still talking about it 45 years later. So a little goes a long way. Pat someone on the back, "Well done, you did good, that's great," right? Doesn't kill you to be supportive and give words of support and let people know anything's possible. You can do it. It's not rocket science.
Yeah, it's powerful
to give that little bit of support.
That is
a little bit of hope
for being so simple. That carries a lot of weight,
especially in today's day and age when it's usually the general opposite.
Right.
Post something on Instagram, you got all the haters jumping on you that shut the fuck up. Let's pump everybody up and get them going.
Hell yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, imagine what the world would be if they were getting pumped up on social media, with the kids.
Down.
Yeah, instead of being told every single day that what you just did was absolutely crap and go die. That's the kind of shit these mean ass kids say to each other.
Yeah. Crazy world.
Yeah.
Stay motivated.
Last but not least, what is in your pockets? You've got to do a pocket dump for us and show us what is in your pockets right now.
Well, I took the keys out. I'll show you what's in my pocket. I got some cash. See that?
Just folded up front pocket. No money clip. No nothing.
Bills.
No money clip. Just loose, folded up. I carry cash. Cash and a set of keys right there. That's it.
Right on.
Right on, man.
There you have it.
I appreciate it. It's been a blast,
dude. It's been great. We appreciate you taking the time, man. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thanks for the invite. It's been emotional. You know where I'm at when you want to do the Mustang.
Sounds good.
We'll hit you up, man. Thank you.
Take it easy.
Take it easy, man.
Cheers and rock on. Bye.
Next up, we got Roadster Shop Hall of Fame. This week we have, what do we have?
We've got a 57 Ford we did for George Poteet.
Mr. George.
Yeah. Yeah, this was, when we start talking about these Hall of Fame cars, it's always difficult because we've done a hell of a lot of cars over the years, but this one definitely stands out. I think this was one of those, I don't know if it was a turning point, but it was definitely something that elevated the Survivor builds for us, took them to the next level of ride quality. And
this was the prototype for the ride line chassis.
It was. Yeah, prototype for the ride line chassis, and also the absolute failure of electric power steering.
I was wondering if you were going to go there, and you went right into it.
Sure.
Yeah.
But, very neat car. It was like Phil said, prototype for the ride line chassis. So this, some of the arms and some of the components on it look a little different than what we're doing right now, but the philosophy was there. It was the same stroke shock, increasing the length, the travel of the shocks, getting some longer, lighter springs on it, just to soften the ride quality. And
That all came from conversations we were having on the road tours with the previous cars. Like, they were good.
It did.
They were great. And then we just kept like,
well, I think that's what the road tours really generated was like, how can you do this better?
Right.
The car is awesome. We're having a great time, but what can we do that makes this experience just a little bit nicer?
you go across so many different roads at different times, at different speeds, and different bridge transitions and sweeps and stuff like that. And then it's like one little thing. You're like, I don't like the way that did that one time. It might not ever happen again.
It could be 2,500 miles and it did it once, and you're like,
yeah.
I don't want to feel that. So this car really started with the focus on the chassis, and then it just kind of evolved. It was a car that was just really kind of a no frills.
George had that car for like 30-something years.
Great survivor car that I think ultimately ended up getting repainted at some point, didn't it?
Did this one get repainted?
Yeah, he repainted it. Patina was killer.
Yeah, the Patina was killer. So we started this off and we had this idea of we're going to try this electric power steering. And let me save everybody like tens of thousands of dollars to let you know that electric power steering is not yet ready for the automotive aftermarket, especially for heavy cars.
At least not for these big cars.
Right.
Maybe if you got a 32 Ford, a Cobra.
Yes.
I don't think it'd be good for a little red wagon, to
So-
be honest with you.
Yeah. Lost a couple weeks in R&D there, but once we resorted back to a standard hydraulic rack, car was phenomenal. The only issue that we were experiencing was, Josh, do you remember this? A creak that we could not fucking find.
Absolutely, I remember it because I was in the trunk for a significant amount of time trying to find it. Now, preface this. Go ahead and
Perseverance.
tell the story. Right? But however, I'm going to say that I was in the trunk for a long period of time while you were driving.
And you didn't fuck with them?
No, I didn't.
No,
we
this was
were
a serious moment.
hyper focused on correcting this issue.
Now
I
listen.
would have been just speed bump after speed bump, just banging.
I
the shit
don't
out
want
of
the
you.
listeners to miss this point. I was in the trunk, right? I'm not
No,
saying
I think
this,
we've got that clear.
again, once you hear the rest of the story,
And this
it'll make-
wasn't a Jeremy Carlson finished trunk.
No,
A
it wasn't.
luxurious
Raw
trunk.
Once you find out where the noise is coming from, I want everyone to understand that we were dead set. 100% would have bet our children on it. We knew where it was coming from. It was coming from the driver's side rear wheel area.
100%.
100%. Now, go ahead.
Yeah, so just like spoiler alert, anytime you hear a creak or a vibration and when you think you know where it's at,
It's the farthest
it's
away.
the furthest, the opposite. If it's in the right rear and you swear it's in the right rear, I guarantee you it's in the front driver's side, right?
In the back seat out, windows down, door panels out, in the trunk, riding around. Keep going.
So we're going through this and we're switching off. Josh is driving. I'm in the back seat. I'm taking trim panels off the car. I'm taking the rear seat loose of the car, chasing this just little chirp. Just like that. Yeah. Right. And then
I'm glad that
wanna
was recorded.
I want to say it was, I mean, we chased it forever. And it was, I remember we pulled up right to the overhead door and I don't know if it was me, somebody leaned up against the fender of the car and the car was off.
Yeah.
And then you heard that.
Yep.
Do it, Josh. What was it? Yeah, just like that. So it ended up, it was the inner fender, just, wasn't it?
Nope. You don't remember what this one was?
No.
I remember exactly.
I thought
what
it was
this
the inner
was.
fender.
Fender
just,
wraps underneath the cowl.
No, look. I'm looking at this picture.
Is the air cleaner?
Does this not ring a bell? Let's find the picture. Hold on. It's going to be in the finish stuff.
I thought this was the one where the inner fender was touching.
No, that was Chris Jacobs' Chevelle, wasn't it?
That was the front
Bumper? Or the
that
bumper
was.
filler panel?
Yes.
All right. Do you remember this? Remember this rubber?
Yes.
Do you remember how it was held together at the very bottom?
Yes, there were two bolts on little sheet metal brackets.
Sheet metal bracket was touching the lip of the cowl on the firewall, just ever so slightly, just enough to go.
And that resonated into the trunk.
Oh yeah, it rendered the car useless.
It was the worst.
I'm starting to think between this and your jingles that both of you are deaf
No, I'm telling
because
you,
the
this
jingles
was,
suck.
This was.
Yeah, the jingles are good.
Have you not heard the jingles?
The jingles are good. The little
Oh, we've got a.
rattle
We'll do
sucked.
a mix. I'll send you the mix of all the
yeah,
jingles.
don't.
Maybe you haven't heard them.
But aside from that, this car was a pretty good learning experience, and diving into the long stroke shocks, lightening up the spring rates, really focusing on ride quality and drivability. Paul Atkins did an awesome bench seat in this thing that
Set it down a little bit.
You were just like planted in it. The best sitting bench seat to date.
Yep.
Would you agree?
100%.
And
Paul knocked it out of the park on that one.
yeah, we piled a tremendous amount of miles on this.
I forgot how fun this car was.
Yeah, this
That
car
was probably the best road trip we went on.
It was.
Thing is a blast to drive, and it did everything.
Yeah, and it was
Even like on the dry lake bed in the dirt.
It did some donuts.
It went off road,
Yeah.
did some donuts. It did it all, and this was kind of one of the early LS conversions where you can kind of demonstrate that you could do virtually. You can make an LS look like virtually anything.
Correct, and we did. That's an original. That's an OG Holman Moody air cleaner.
Yeah,
Just further piss off the purists.
Yeah, well, it's still kind
you
of
could see the HM
just like it
stamped
was.
into the corner right there.
yeah. There was some really cool shit on that car.
Great car, great cruiser. I can't think of a better road tour car. Vintage Air under dash unit, which if you don't know, a Vintage Air under dash unit,
It's basically a freezer.
yeah, you
It
need
go-
to put a
it's
jacket.
it's what, probably 35 degrees colder than any of the other air conditions,
It is. It's
and 6,000 CFM more.
underrated how badass it is.
Yeah.
You don't get defrost with it, so that's a drawback. But if
Man,
you
it blows
want
cold.
to absolutely freeze your balls off,
Yep.
under dash unit all day. Yeah, great car. Tremendous amount of fun with it. Dakota gauge cluster tack.
Do we have the pictures from the Oatman? Was it Oatman to Texas?
Oh, look
That,
at
like
that.
that awesome.
Might be some of those pictures on here. You remember?
I forgot this was the California trip too with this one.
Yeah.
We ran down
From
PCH.
Vegas and all, yeah.
Was this the one where we were fucking with little squirrels?
Yep.
Yep.
That was in Pebble Beach.
Yeah.
Yeah, the squirrels. It was awesome. Do you remember this though? Like this was like after at the end of a long day, we sat there. We were legitimately like a little bit emotional at like watching the sunset.
I'm getting
there.
emotional right now watching it, like just looking at the picture.
It was amazing.
It really was.
You forget about those times and stuff. That was a really cool trip.
Yeah, that was some of the best scenery I think we've ever been on. And
Yeah.
And all this is like, this wasn't set up for a photo shoot. Like this,
We were driving
driving
we're
down
like,
the road and hooked a right.
oh, yeah, we can get in there. We can get in there.
and this just happened.
On the side of the road.
I think Chris snapped those pictures, didn't he?
Yeah, there's something wrong with the pictures.
Yeah, that could be. Aside from the GoPro sitting in the dash of the Camaro, which we could probably Photoshop, that's a phenomenal picture.
There's
Yeah.
a lot of cleaning afterwards.
But
That one doesn't open.
Mini picture. Yeah. Keep scrolling down.
It was
Yeah, this also turned into like driving on the side of that mountain with the awesome sunset in the background.
yeah.
yeah,
Everything about that one.
a lot of fun. Great car, great memories. Hell of a road tour.
That run from Oatman, when we left Oatman, where all the donkeys were at. Anybody that's ever been to Oatman, Arizona, knows about the little donkey town. That was really cool. Yep. However, leaving there, we went down all the way back over, and then came into Kingman, didn't we, or wherever it was at, to go back down, and it was probably a 200-mile run
Of nothing.
It felt like it was 12 hours. That was the one. After this, I think, was the night that we ate pizza in the parking lot and then couldn't check into our rooms because Mr. Black had already checked in.
Oh,
I'm pretty sure this was that night.
Yep.
No, that was in Paso Robles, California. That was before this.
oh, that was after the pizza, right? Can we get
Yeah, it had good parking lot pizza.
That was some of the
California? Yeah,
best.
California pizza.
Parking lot pizza was the bomb.
That was a
Kitchen.
shocker. Yeah, it wasn't CPK. But-
We're going to do another road tour this year? Are we going on a
well,
road tour this year?
we've got to. I don't know what's coming up or what the schedule is, but we're going to have quite the fleet of legend trucks ready to hit the road. And I think a road tour would be a fantastic way to
Get 'em
enjoy
all
those.
together.
Yeah.
Off-road tour.
Be cool.
See what I did there?
Yeah.
Yeah, you said off road.
Because
Meaning
they're four-wheel
off.
drive.
No, yeah, I get it.
I pick up on it right away. Like you didn't.
Just because I didn't like go crazy about
You
it.
didn't recognize the brilliance in what I had said.
It's powerful. It's a good idea.
Thanks again for listening to Oil and Whiskey with the Roadster Shop and Ironclad Original. If you like the show, be sure to leave us a rating and a review. If you want more jingles, DM us and let us know. Or email Phil at phil@roadstershop.com and let him know that you like the jingles.
/jingle.
Thanks again to Magnus Walker. We'll see you again next week.